Hey everyone, this is Julia with episode number 84 of the Mixology Talk podcast. I remember back when Chris was still working behind the bar, the holidays seemed like the hardest time of the year. Not just for his schedule, but for his wrists, elbows, and knees. It seemed like everything was hurting. In preparation for another holiday season, we thought we would ask physical therapist Dr. Karina Woo to come and join us on the podcast and give some of her professional recommendations for avoiding and treating common occupational hazards for bartenders. Now, I definitely learned a lot during this conversation, and I'm sure that you will too. Find the show notes and more information about Karina at mixologytalk.com/84. And without further ado, let's get into it. Hey, Karina, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, nice to speak with you.
Absolutely. So before we get started, I was wondering if you could just do us a favor and tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice and maybe why you know a little bit about bartender injuries.
Okay, so I am a physical therapist. I am based in New York City, but I'm originally from Los Angeles. And I have been in practice for 16 years in New York City. I'm a big foodie, and so how the path to chefs and bartenders came into being is Wiley Dufresne is a friend and a client, and he's the one who kind of got me into meeting all of these chefs and bartenders and being able to treat them. I own a practice in Midtown Manhattan. It is called Active Care Physical Therapy. And it is an outpatient private practice. It's for the walking wounded. And our specialties are manual therapies, Pilates-based rehabilitation, and kinesiology tape. So we do all of the fun and good stuff that helps treat anyone with overuse injuries, repetitive stress injuries like bartenders. And we do the newest techniques. So kinesiology taping, cupping, which is all the rage from the Olympics, and a lot of hands-on myofascial release.
Oh, that's fantastic. I don't know anything about a lot of those things, so that's really interesting. I can only imagine where you're located in Manhattan. There's got to be a huge need for patients who are in the hospitality industry.
There is. There are a lot. It's hard to find people here, though, because there's so many. We're so condensed in the city.
That's true. Yeah, I can only imagine. So when you look at the sort of patients that you've seen in your practice, what are some common occupational industries that you often see come about as a result of the bartending career?
A lot of the job requirements in bartending are going to affect the joints of the arms, the low back, and the legs. So tennis elbow is a big one. That is the injury that is how I met Wiley, because they're doing a lot of mixing and pouring and shaking and squeezing, stirring, all of that wrist related stuff. You can also get low back pain because of any heavy lifting that might occur on the job. Also because of the cramped quarters that you might be working in. And you can also get shoulder issues, knee issues, ankle, all the way down to the feet.
You know, now that you mention it, Chris actually suffered from tennis elbow while he was working behind the bar. And it's exactly what you said, right, Chris?
Yeah, just a lot of shaking, hand squeezing, all that just adds up over time. And it never really goes away. So in the mornings, it'll be pretty intense. And then oddly enough, as you start to warm up and get back into work, it starts to get better. You don't think about it as much. But it's always kind of that persistent pain that's always there.
Well, actually, a lot of people don't know that those injuries into those smaller areas of the body can actually stem from something more central. So posture is a big deal across the board for everyone. But if you look at people's posture, especially behind the bar, and especially in New York City, where there are some really tight bar spaces, sometimes you don't really fit back there. So your injury could actually be stemming for something in the core and your posture and your shoulder girdle all the way down out into the elbow. And that's actually just where you're feeling it because you're putting a lot of stress into that area.
That's really interesting. I never thought about cramped quarters being a contributor to this problem, but it's gotta be.
Absolutely. One of our other clients was Jim Meehan from Please Don't Tell, which is kind of like that speakeasy bar. So you walk in through the phone booth and the bar itself is just tiny. And one of the bartenders that had replaced him was this very large guy who was well over 6 feet. And I was like, you just don't fit in this bar because it's so small and dark and covered that anyone of any substantial size just doesn't, they look disproportionate in the bar.
Oh, that's so funny. And I imagine if it's cramped quarters, you're doing probably more twisting than, walking to another location. You're probably doing a lot of that sort of movement.
Yes, you're bending down to reach the customers, or bending across the bar also is very stressful. If you lean over onto the bar counter to hang out with your customer and talk to them, you are, again, positioning yourself in a poor posture.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember when my tennis elbow would flare up is usually when I was clearing plates across a bar, and I had a pretty deep bar. So I would put a lot of strain on my lower back and my elbows when I was gripping the plates. And that's when I really noticed that it was becoming a problem. So that makes a lot of sense.
And if I remember correctly, where you were working had pretty heavy dishware.
Yeah. It was kind of like the trifecta of terrible, just, long-term injuries.
So sort of on that note, then let's, assuming that these injuries are definitely a risk, are there any techniques or stretches or other ways that bartenders who are working behind the bar can actually prevent these injuries or make them less likely?
Absolutely. So again, I always focus on posture because we're also Pilates based. So you have to set yourself into the proper biomechanical position in order for all of your extremities to actually be as strong and stable as possible. So you have to start with the posture, and then it also requires proper body mechanics. So as you're leaning across the bar, that would be holding your deep abdominals into your spine to help stabilize your spine and to reduce any compressive loads. Keeping your shoulder girdle and your hips, which are the bigger joints that feed into the arms or the legs, strong and flexible, also takes a lot of pressure off of the more distant body parts, which would be in the upper body, the elbow and the wrist and hand, and then for the lower body, the knee, ankle, and foot. So doing exercises that both stretch and strengthen the joint help keep it at its most optimal function.
So it sounds like that would be something like Pilates or yoga, maybe?
Pilates or yoga are good. They're both very holistic and they both incorporate the whole body. But when it comes to rehabilitating an injured body part, you're probably also going to need very isolated exercises. So say you have the wrist or the elbow injury, rather, it actually is a wrist and hand issue because the muscles just connect to the elbow. So you have to do exercises that strengthen your wrist and hand, but then you have to do exercises that strengthen the elbow, which are the biceps and the triceps, and then all the way around the shoulder girdle, which are the rotator cuff muscles, as well as muscles around the shoulder blade, and then just directly around the shoulder joint. So it's pretty complex, and there's a lot to do in order to actually get the body as healthy as possible so that you can withstand injuries on the job.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because I mean, as a layman, my assumption is I hurt my elbow. I need to work on my elbow. I don't think about how everything is so connected.
Yes. When you're dealing in rehab, we're trying to fix the problem versus treat the symptoms. So if my elbow hurts, what's the first thing you do? You're going to rub your elbow. And that's fine because it does help with the symptoms of the pain and the injury, but you're not technically fixing the problem. And that's why, Chris, you keep saying that every morning or something you wake up and it's still there. So it hasn't really been fixed, right? You've just learned how to manage your symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, kind of on the same note, because I know that, to your point, when people think of like injuries and pain, they only think about the local area. So like, for example, with tennis elbow, I always thought that it's a thing in my elbow. So the natural tendency, especially with a lot of doctors that I've seen, is to administer cortisone. Yeah. And that was kind of my thought. Like I tried it once and they said, yeah, it'll work for a little bit and, it'll make you feel better. But I wanted to get your thoughts on it because I feel like it's an easy fix that may have longer term side effects.
Like a short-term fix.
Yeah. So like to your point, it doesn't really solve the problem. It masks the pain. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. Cortisone is a very strong anti-inflammatory medication, and it can be taken oral or it can be injected into a target tissue. So it's similar to taking like an Aleve or an Advil, except you're going straight to that spot. So you get this medicine into tissue that's really irritated, and it helps calm the inflammation down. The issue with cortisone injection is that the cortisone is so strong that they limit the number of treatments that one can receive because it can actually break down tissues. So,
Oh, wow.
yes, on the first point, you're just treating the local inflammation, but you haven't figured out why it's so inflamed, whether it's a muscle imbalance or a joint that's out of alignment that's causing this extra stress on the tissue. And then two, you're going to potentially break down the tissues a little bit because as we age, we get all dried and shriveled up, and all of our nice healthy tissues, the muscles and the tendons, also dry out. So when you put a medication in there like that also can degrade the tissue, you're just sort of speeding along the process.
Interesting. And then, yeah, because I feel like a lot of people just kind of naturally go that way as a quick fix. So I definitely appreciate the knowledge behind it of why it's probably better to seek holistic stretching and strengthening training versus a quick fix like cortisone. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Now that I think about it, I feel like I was speaking to a bartender a couple months ago who mentioned that he had a cortisone shot and it helped for 6 months, and then he had another one and it helped for 3 months, and then he had another one and it didn't really help. And it's kind of scary as it's not a solution, like you said.
It's not a solution. And also because there's a needle that gets inserted into the tissues, it's invasive. So there's other risks like for infection. And then also that needle puncturing through tissues will leave scar tissue in its wake because you create a little hole in there and then you pull out the needle and the body will mend itself. So that will also sort of break down the tissues. And that's a very common statement of the first one worked really well. The second one was a little bit half of that term. And then the third one doesn't really work because now it's just degrading it. And you, again, still haven't addressed why that tissue is so stressed out and then done any measures to actually strengthen it and get it more healthy.
That makes sense. Yeah. So if a bartender is listening to this and they are going, oh, I do have a sore elbow, how do they know the difference between just a sore elbow and something that really needs to see a physician or a physical therapist like yourself?
The rule of thumb is if a pain is very sharp or it's excruciating and it's unrelenting, and then oftentimes it's kind of spreading, like it's not just localized to one area, then that would warrant some sort of medical professional assessment.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because a lot of people, and Chris said this, he wakes up in the morning, he's got some pain, but once he gets going, it feels better. But he keeps waking up with pain, right? Which means there's something there that's just not being addressed. When you start moving and you're getting blood flowing to the tissues become more malleable, more flexible. And so it might not hurt so much. So your body doesn't perceive the discomfort as much, but then it keeps coming back. So that's another reason why one should seek out medical care is also if you've had a pain for so long, that you have to listen to the body because it's trying to speak to you and say, hey, something's not right here. Give us extra help.
Yeah, definitely. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. If you scrape your knee, you're probably good. But something that shows up every single morning is a little more concerning.
Yes, especially for a prolonged period of time. So it's usually, again, sharp, acute pain that just really doesn't feel right. That's when you got to seek medical care. And then also pain that just doesn't go away, because what happens is the body develops these compensatory strategies so that you can still do what you need to do in life, but you're going to start using other body parts, or you're going to use the muscles in a different fashion than how they were really originally built to be used. And then you'll actually end up causing another issue.
Got it. And I don't know if this is a silly question, but should somebody see a physician or a physical therapist?
In New York State, we are direct access. So if someone has an aches and pain, they can come in to a physical therapist and just say, hey, my elbow hurts, or hey, my shoulder hurts. In some states, you might need to see a physician first in order for them to prescribe physical therapy.
Okay. Okay. So it kind of depends on where you're located, it sounds like.
Depends on where you're located. Typically, if it's something with a movement, meaning it's a muscle or tendon, so it's based on your position or based on, again, some movement or activity, that means it's musculoskeletal in nature, which is what physical therapists address. We deal with the body and the movements and joints and positions and things like that. So that is something that we would absolutely be able to address.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
I learned something new.
And actually, physical therapists with the new degree, which is the doctor of physical therapy, it is specifically for autonomy in practice, meaning we should be able to assess if you are a good physical therapy candidate or if you are not, meaning this is a pain that's coming maybe from an internal organ that's just presenting in your elbow or your low back. So we should be able to pick up on those types of red flags that would say, hey, you actually need to see a medical physician, an internist or something like that.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I kind of hate to ask this question, but sort of given the state of our industry, unfortunately, a lot of folks who work behind the bar either don't have health insurance or they have, really high deductible plans, or basically medical care is expensive. Are there any resources that you can recommend for bartenders that may not have good healthcare coverage?
So a lot of people go into the new walk-in clinics that seem to be erupting in New York City, at least in this city. We've got tons of walk-in clinics that I believe take all sorts of healthcare insurance because they're meant for the walking wounded to be able to just access medical care. So that's one option. The other option is speaking to your colleagues, because you'd be surprised at how many people have experienced the same thing that you have once you actually acknowledge that you have some injury.
Yeah.
The way that a lot of our industry friends come in is basically word of mouth. So they'll find out, they'll call. We, in particular, are an out-of-network facility, which means we don't contract with an insurance company, but we do accept insurance if they have what are called out-of-network benefits. And oftentimes, because it's a word-of-mouth referral and we just want to help you get better, we can negotiate a reduced rate to help you get through your treatment plan. But you just have to ask us. Because a lot of times people will come in, they'll come in for a first visit, they understand what's going on, they realize that it will take some time because they've let it go so long that you actually now need a series of medical visits to get better. But they balk at the price, and it's an uncomfortable topic. But if you just say, hey, is there any way we can work something out? Then we're very open to being able to negotiate a reasonable rate so that we can treat you and then I can pay my expenses.
I feel like folks go into the profession of caring for others because they care about others, not necessarily because they're just trying to get rich on somebody else's injuries. I'm sure you're not the only physical therapist out there who is willing to negotiate because they just want to help.
Exactly. And physical therapists are the worst at having the business talk of it. I've been in business in private practice for a long period of time, so I'm more comfortable. But at the end of the day, it's about the patient care. But I can't just devalue my services. So it's a two-way street. They got to say something. I'm open to working it out. And it has to be fair for both parties.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really amazing that you're able to do that and be able to help people. And it's really very, very cool. I wish I would have known that when I was going through my injuries.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't know to ask. And to your point, I think, asking around, getting referrals from folks that, your coworkers, your colleagues, the people that you know in the industry. Who have you worked with? Did they work with you on price? And just being willing to ask the question of like, you know what, unfortunately, this is really expensive. Is there anything we can do? I hate that we sort of are in a healthcare situation where we have to do that, but it's better to ask the question than to not get treatment.
Absolutely. It's always, you're more apt to get better or the same care as a colleague. And usually you'll find that somebody's seen somebody for something. And usually they find somebody that they like. So once they do, they're more apt to share that information.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Because they really like that practitioner. And then when it comes to like discussing finances, in my first job, when I wanted an extra week of vacation at year one, I was like, I'm just going to ask. And my colleague was like, are you crazy? And I was like, what's the worst he's going to say? No. And I still have 1 week of vacation. So why not just ask? And it's the same principle. If we say,
Right.
if someone were to say no, that might maybe turn you on to something, I mean, there's got to be some reason why you wouldn't be able to negotiate your rate, but you can
it's
always,
not like it's going to cost you anything. It's not going to say, well, no, and now I'm charging you double.
it's exactly. It's better to have a successful case where you actually had a patient who came in for whatever injury, and then you discharge them completely back to function. You always want to get them back to their quality of life and all of their activities of daily living. That's a better success story than being cut off because someone financially can't afford it.
And to your point, when that person goes back to work and says, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. I feel like this problem is solved, and they get asked for a referral, guess who they're going to refer?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And definitely how our industry works. I mean, we have a lot of time to talk between our colleagues and stuff. Usually if it's at the bar we're working at, or if, we get out of work and we go to another bar. It's a very tight-knit group. So
it's a very social group.
It very much is, yeah. So definitely the referrals will it's a thing.
It's a thing.
It's a thing.
It definitely is. We're all in the customer service industry. So so if I were to discuss a case and refer somebody, right, it's great for marketing for us. And so it helps build our business. And then the same principle for the bartender, right? If you're engaging with your customers, they're going to love you. They're going to come back. You get repeat business for the facility itself. You might get a bigger tip, right? And then you're sharing information, which makes someone's quality of life better. So that's always very gratifying.
Absolutely. It's super fulfilling. Exactly. So I hate to ask, but if somebody's working as a bartender for a long time, is it just inevitable that they're going to get some of these injuries, or are some people luckier than others? Are some people built stronger, or is it just kind of part of life?
I would say there's always a genetic component to certain things, but I think people who have more of a healthy disposition, they take better care of themselves. They really keep their body healthy in between their shifts, and also have a better sense of their body mechanics, can avoid the injuries better. There's some people, I treated a bartender, she just was so unlucky. She just has chronic ankle sprains, and she just stepped on the edge of that wet mat and just rolled and fell on the ground. And it was just like, it was such a fluke incident. It was just like placement of her foot and just how she put the weight onto it that it just rolled. So it is kind of inevitable, because you do have a very physical job, and then the quarters aren't always the best.
Sure, absolutely.
And I can imagine footwear must be a big factor as well, especially for women who may choose to wear heels or something like that.
It's not the smartest move to be in heels during your shift. I understand for hostessing, you have to look very hip and sexy possibly. But so long as you're only wearing them for your shift, and then you can sit just to give your feet a little bit of a break, or at least slide your feet out, I don't know, on a very quick shift break, it's just a smart thing to do.
Yeah, that's definitely good to know. I don't know. I'll have to ask around on what the common footwear choices are for women behind the bar, but I can only imagine with the mats that they have that high heels would be challenging.
Definitely.
So last but not least, I did want to ask you one more question from a manager's perspective. I mean, a lot of the folks who listen to this podcast also have management responsibilities. And one of the roles of a manager is to try to help your team. Are there any suggestions that you have for somebody in a management role to help, I don't know, improve your situation so that your bartenders can help avoid these injuries? Is there anything a manager can do from the top?
Definitely teaching body mechanics, especially for the bar that they work in, so that if they catch their staff bending too much, not using their body appropriately, that's a really good thing to do. And it shows that you actually care about the person as a whole versus just the job.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing. And then just promoting health and wellness. So promoting good hydration, better eating habits, exercise outside of the job is really important, because I've also dated some chefs. It is a very long shift between the prep work and the service, and then the to cap it all off. And a lot of them like to end with a drink at the bar, like 2+ in the morning, right? And then
Right.
if you can't get up to exercise, you never sort of give back to your own body. And then it just starts this whole cycle of like your energy just kind of goes standing around. You have such prolonged positional type of stresses on the body that just starts eating away. So if a manager can help promote, the thought of maintaining their own workout regimen to keep their body strong, that's a really key point.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think you're absolutely right. And that might be, that might be involved with scheduling. That might be just in prioritizing. Is there, I'm imagining a bartender behind the bar may not know that they don't have great posture. Is there like some sort of a posture expert or perhaps someone like yourself who can actually come into the bar and advise on that the manager could bring in?
Yes, absolutely. That's the ergonomics training, basically. Like large corporations will do that for their employees because they want to avoid work-related injuries. So you can always tell your staff to just stand up with really good upright posture, similar to like how a military cadet stands. If you ever look at them, right, they're very upright, but that's a little too extreme. So for the woman, you can say, think like a ballerina, like think like a dancer. You know how you look at them and you can tell that there's something about the way that they move. There's a grace, there's a fluidity. Yeah. But it also is really nice because we're such a visually oriented society that when you come in and you see these service staff, whether it's wait staff or the bartender behind the bar, when they have good posture, there's a confidence there. There's an engagement with your customers that's going to be warm and inviting. And obviously a smile on the face helps.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But it would help avoid injuries.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one quick question. I know you touched on this a little bit, especially with the declining energy and kind of the life or the patterns that we develop as bartenders and industry professionals. When you begin treatment of anybody, is there anything that you recommend they cut out of their diet that could help with their treatment or just maintaining more energy?
Excessive alcohol, which goes against your whole practice.
Yeah, you might get a little pushback on that one. I'm just going to go ahead and say that.
Yes, that was going to come out. Excessive alcohol on a personal level, right? On your own personal intake. And then, just deep fried foods or high salt or a lot of packaged foods are not the best to eat. It just drains the body, right? So it's just a standard of good health of like eating more fresh fruits and vegetables, making sure you have lean proteins.
What about coffee and caffeine in general? Because I remember mine was I'd walk in the shift. I'd start off with a double shot of espresso. I'd sit down, get my prep ready. And right before shift, I would have another double shot of espresso and probably one throughout the shift as well. Is caffeine okay in your professional opinion, or is that one of those things too that moderation is key to success on that?
Did you have really big swings with your mood or your energy level with that caffeine intake?
I would say with the energy level, I would notice that I would need it more than anything, than like if I didn't have my coffee in the morning, I could definitely feel drained and exhausted, and I use the caffeine as kind of a way to pick me up and get me motivated and get my energy going for a shift.
I'm absolutely not opposed to caffeine, but if you're heavily reliant on it as a stimulant so that you can make it through, then your body is missing out somewhere. Because at least I know for myself and others that I've spoken with, if you get up and you start your day with a workout, again, you're exercising your own body, you're getting your fluids to move, you're doing exercises that get your muscles strong so that they can support your joints and your metabolism. You feel that your energy is pretty even throughout the day and also a little bit more elevated overall. So if you're reliant on the caffeine to keep you up because you don't have that internal energy and you're not exercising, then that's when it's like, you got to be careful with that.
Sure, absolutely.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, bartenders should eat healthy, avoid excessive alcohol, excessive caffeine, and fried foods. So basically, the bartender lifestyle.
That's the backbone of our whole existence right there.
It's true. You guys are night crawlers, right?
It's so
Yep,
true.
absolutely.
Oh gosh, that's funny. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think that answers all of the questions that I had. And actually, that's really insightful. There's so many things that I learned today that I just had no idea about the kind of risks that bartenders take on behind the bar. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your expertise.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad you guys learned something. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, just before you go, if anybody's nearby, I know we've definitely got some listeners in the New York area. Where are you located? Can folks come and I know you said you're a walk-in clinic, so can they walk in and say hello?
They could walk in and say hello. I am on the 12th floor of my commercial building, but the business name is Active Care Physical Therapy, and our address is 12 West 37th Street between 5th and 6th Avenue.
Excellent. Well, hopefully anybody who needs your help will come visit you, but also hopefully there aren't too many people who need your help as well.
Exactly. We actually try not to see our patients. So, but at the same time, we've got to make a living as well. So
Absolutely.
It's so true. It's so true. Well, Thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us today, Karina.
Thank you, Julie and Chris. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Another huge thank you to Dr. Karina Woo for taking the time to chat with us about this super important issue in our industry. I know Chris and I have talked a bit about bartender injuries before on the podcast, but there is nothing like getting the perspective of a healthcare professional. I hope today's episode has been helpful, and maybe it's inspired you to pay a bit more attention to your posture behind the bar. Once again, you can find links and show notes at mixologytalk.com/84. Take care of yourselves out there and have a great shift. Cheers! Never miss an episode by subscribing in iTunes or YouTube. And as always, check out the show notes by clicking on the right.